The moment his lips crashed onto mine, I knew this was wrong. So terribly, unforgivably wrong. And yet, the heat surging through my veins, the way his hands gripped my waist with such raw hunger, made it impossible to stop. Say you want this. Ethan's voice was low, rough, almost a growl against my neck. I should have said no. I should have pushed him away. But instead my breath hitched, and my body betrayed me, pressing against him, craving more. Ethan? I whispered, my fingers curling into his shirt. His name felt forbidden on my tongue. My son's name. But I wasn't his mother. Not really. Not in the way that mattered now. His mouth found mine again. This time deeper, more desperate. As if he was trying to devour every last shred of restraint left in me. His tongue slid against mine, coaxing, demanding, and my body arched instinctively. My back hit the wall of his bedroom, the door slamming shut behind us. I've wanted you for so long, he murmured. His lips trailing along my jaw, down my throat. Every time I saw you with him, it made me fucking crazy. I clenched my eyes shut, a shiver running through me. We can't, I managed. Even as my hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. We shouldn't. Then stop me, he challenged, his fingers tracing down my sides, leaving a burning path in their wake. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because this was Ethan, my Ethan. The boy I had given life to, only to be torn away from. The boy I had searched for, longed for, only to find him standing in my husband's home, calling me his stepmother. And now he was a man. A dangerously beautiful, untamed man, who looked at me not with the innocent adoration of a son, but with the dark, possessive hunger of a lover. Fuck! He groaned as I tilted my head back, giving in just a little more, letting him press me against the wall with his hard, sculpted body. I don't care anymore. I don't care if it's wrong. His hand slid up my thigh, fingers pushing beneath the silk of my dress, and I gasped as heat coiled low in my stomach. Tell me to stop, he murmured against my lips, his breath hot and heavy. I should have. But instead I whispered, don't. And then everything unraveled. His hands were everywhere, gripping, teasing, exploring, igniting something inside me that I had buried for so long. His lips traced fire along my skin. His body pressed me into the mattress. His name spilled from my lips over and over again as pleasure consumed me whole. It was reckless. It was madness. It was the most forbidden, most exhilarating thing I had ever done. And as I lay beneath him, tangled in sweat-dampened sheets, my fingers tracing lazy patterns on his bare back, a single thought gnawed at the edges of my blissful haze. This wasn't just wrong. It was only the beginning of something far, far worse. I woke up tangled in Ethan's arms, my body still sore from the night before. His slow, steady breaths tickled the nape of my neck, his hand resting possessively on my waist. My mind screamed at me to move, to leave before this mistake spiraled further out of control, but I stayed. Because deep down I knew this wasn't a mistake. It had never been a mistake. I turned carefully, my gaze tracing the sharp angles of his face, the way his dark lashes rested against his cheekbones, the slight part of his lips as he slept. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, so different from the man who had claimed me so mercilessly just hours ago. My fingers twitched with the urge to touch him, but I stopped myself. I needed to go. I needed to face the man I had betrayed. Slipping out of bed, I reached for my dress, the silk cool against my skin. The room smelled like us, like sweat, like sex, like something irrevocably tainted. I could still feel the ghost of Ethan's touch on my body, his teeth on my skin, his name rasping against my throat like a prayer. As I turned toward the door, his voice stopped me. Leaving already? I froze, my breath catching in my chest. I didn't dare turn around. I have to, I whispered. Ethan sighed, and a moment later, I felt him behind me, his warmth pressing into my back. His hand slid around my waist, pulling me against him, and I bit my lip as I felt just how much he still wanted me. I don't want this to end, he murmured against my shoulder, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to my bare skin. I squeezed my eyes shut. It has to. His grip on me tightened. Why? Because of him. Because of my husband. His father. I turned then, looking up into his dark, burning eyes. Because it's wrong. Ethan scoffed. It didn't feel wrong last night. I swallowed hard, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. Last night was a mistake. His jaw clenched, and for a moment he said nothing. Then his hand reached up, fingers tangling in my hair as he pulled me closer. Then tell me you didn't want it. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because I couldn't lie to him. To myself. Ethan smirked, as if he already knew my answer. His thumb brushed over my lower lip, his eyes dark and knowing. I'm not letting you go that easily, he murmured. My breath hitched. Ethan. Before I could finish, he kissed me again, deep and slow, as if branding me as his. And despite everything, despite the guilt, the fear, the consequences, I kissed him back. Because I was already his. And I had been from the very beginning. I spent the rest of the day pretending nothing had happened. Breakfast with Daniel was excruciating. I sat across from him, watching as he read the newspaper, sipping his coffee, completely oblivious. The weight of my betrayal settled like a stone in my stomach, making every bite of food taste like ash. I was thinking of taking you out to dinner tonight, Daniel said, flipping a page. It's been a while since we had a proper date night. My fingers clenched around my fork. A date night. With my husband. After spending the night in his son's bed. I forced a smile. That sounds nice. Daniel glanced up at me then, his sharp blue eyes scanning my face. You look tired. I swallowed, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. Didn't sleep well. If he only knew why. He reached across the table, his hand warm as it covered mine. Maybe I should cancel my meetings today. Stay home with you. Panic flared in my chest. No, I blurted too quickly. Daniel frowned, his grip tightening slightly. Ava, are you sure you're okay? I forced another smile, softer this time. I'm fine, really. Go to work. I'll be here when you get back. His eyes lingered on me for a moment longer before he nodded. And then finally he left. The second the door shut behind him, I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling as I pushed my plate away. I had to get out of this house. I needed air. I grabbed my coat and left without thinking, my feet carrying me down the street, past familiar buildings and busy sidewalks. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. It was still in Ethan's bed, still tangled in his sheets, still lost in the way he had made me feel, so alive, so wanted, so completely undone. I closed my eyes, shame crawling up my spine. What the hell was wrong with me? I had spent years searching for my son, only to find him in the most unimaginable way. And instead of protecting him, instead of being the mother he deserved, I had let him take me, over and over again. And worst of all, I had loved every second of it. Ava. My breath caught. I turned sharply, my heart hammering in my chest. Ethan stood a few feet away, leaning against the wall of a coffee shop, hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. His dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach twist. How did you? I followed you, he admitted, pushing off the wall and closing the distance between us. I figured you'd try to run. I took a step back, but he kept coming. You shouldn't be here, I whispered. He tilted his head, lips curling into a slow, knowing smile. Neither should you. I swallowed hard, my pulse roaring in my ears. Last night was a mistake. Ethan's eyes darkened. You said that this morning. Because it's the truth. Then why are you shaking? His voice was soft now, teasing. But there was something else in it too. Something dangerous. I hated that he knew what he did to me. Hated that I couldn't hide it. Ethan reached for me, fingers ghosting over my wrist, and I inhaled sharply at the contact. Come with me, he murmured. I should have walked away. I should have screamed at him, told him this was over, that it could never happen again. But instead, I let him pull me into a dark alley, away from prying eyes, away from the world. And then his mouth was on mine again. I moaned into the kiss, my hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer, needing more, needing him. Fuck Ava. He groaned against my lips, his hands gripping my hips. You drive me insane. I gasped as he pushed me against the brick wall, his body flush against mine, hard and unyielding. My breath hitched when his thigh pressed between my legs, igniting that unbearable ache inside me. This is wrong, I whispered, even as my nails raked down his back. Ethan smirked, his lips tracing along my jaw down my throat. "Then why are you so wet for me?" A shudder racked through me. God help me, I couldn't stop. His hand slid beneath my dress, fingers finding my most sensitive spot, and I bit down on my lip to keep from crying out. "Say you don't want this," he murmured, his breath hot against my skin. I couldn't, so I didn't. Instead, I let him ruin me all over again. Right there in that alley, my hands tangled in his hair, my body arching into his touch, my mind drowning in him. And when it was over, when I was left gasping against the cold brick, my legs barely able to hold me up, Ethan cupped my face in his hands and kissed me. Slow, deep, possessive. "This isn't over," he whispered against my lips. A chill ran through me, 'cause I knew he was right. And worse? I didn't want it to be. I didn't go home immediately. I wandered the streets, my body still trembling, my mind clouded with everything that had just happened. The weight of my sins pressed down on me, suffocating. Yet the memory of Ethan's touch burned beneath my skin like an unquenchable fire. I knew I should be ashamed, and I was, but that didn't change the way my body ached for him. The way my heart pounded every time I thought of the way he looked at me. As if I were the only thing in the world that mattered. As if I were his. By the time I returned home, Daniel was already waiting for me. He sat in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his expression unreadable. My heart lurched, fear coiling in my stomach. Did he know? Had he somehow found out? I forced myself to keep my face neutral as I set my bag down, meeting his gaze as steadily as I could. "You're home early," I said, my voice carefully composed. Daniel studied me for a long moment, before taking a slow sip of his drink. "You weren't answering your phone." I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out my phone to see multiple missed calls from him. I cursed silently. "I went for a walk," I lied smoothly. "I needed some air." His eyes didn't leave mine. "You've been acting strange lately." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a small laugh, shaking my head. "I've just been tired. That's all." He didn't look convinced. He set his glass down on the table, rising to his feet and closing the distance between us. My breath caught as he reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek, tilting my face up to his. "If there's something bothering you, Ava, you can tell me." His voice was gentle, but there was something beneath it, something sharp, almost probing. I swallowed hard. "There's nothing." His thumb traced along my jaw, and for a fleeting moment guilt clawed at my chest. This man loved me. He had given me everything. And yet I had betrayed him in the worst possible way. But even as the guilt gnawed at me, all I could think about was Ethan. Ethan's hands on me, Ethan's mouth claiming mine, Ethan whispering my name like a prayer. Daniel exhaled softly before pulling away, running a hand through his hair. "All right. If you say so." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Because the moment I stepped into the hallway, I saw Ethan standing at the top of the stairs watching us. My heart stopped. His dark eyes locked onto mine, and in them, I saw everything. The lust, the possessiveness. The unspoken promise that this wasn't over. And God help me, I didn't want it to be. That night, I lay in bed beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling, my body thrumming with restless energy. I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Couldn't stop remembering the way his hands had felt on my skin, the way his voice had sent shivers down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to forget, but it was useless. I was already too far gone. I didn't even realize I had fallen asleep until I felt a hand on my thigh. My eyes fluttered open, my breath catching as I turned my head to find Ethan standing over me. My pulse spiked in panic. "What are you?" He pressed a finger to my lips, silencing me. His eyes flickered to Daniel, who was still asleep beside me, completely unaware. A wicked smile played on Ethan's lips as he leaned down, his breath hot against my ear. "Come with me," he whispered. I should have said no. I should have pushed him away. But instead I let him take my hand, let him pull me out of bed, my heart hammering as he led me out of the room, down the hall and into his bedroom. The door clicked shut behind us, and before I could say a word, he was on me, his lips crashing against mine, his hands tearing at my clothes. I moaned into his mouth, my body arching into his. Desperate, greedy, insatiable. "This is insane." I gasped between kisses, but my fingers dug into his back, urging him closer. Ethan chuckled darkly, his hands gripping my hips, lifting me effortlessly. Then stop me, he murmured against my skin. I didn't. I couldn't. And so I let him take me again, let him unravel me completely, let myself drown in the sheer madness of him. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, our bodies slick with sweat, our breaths still heavy. Ethan traced lazy circles on my bare stomach, his expression unreadable. Tell me you don't want this, he said suddenly. I turned my head to look at him, my heart aching. I can't. His fingers trailed up to my face, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. Then stop fighting it. I closed my eyes, exhaling shakily. It's not that simple. Ethan propped himself up on one elbow, his gaze burning into mine. It is. You want me, I want you. That's all that matters. I swallowed hard. Daniel. Forget him. Ethan cut me off, his voice low, dangerous. When you're with me, do you think about him? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. His smirk widened. I didn't think so. I wanted to be angry at him for being so smug. But the truth was he was right. When I was with him, nothing else existed. Nothing else mattered. But that didn't change the fact that this was wrong. That I was betraying my husband. That I was falling deeper into something I couldn't control. That I was sleeping with my own son. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me, and I sat up abruptly, clutching the sheets to my chest. I should go. Ethan's expression darkened. Ava. I need to think. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. But he didn't stop me as I slipped out of bed, gathering my clothes and dressing quickly. As I reached the door, he spoke again, his voice softer this time. You'll come back. I hesitated, gripping the doorknob tightly. Then, without looking back, I stepped out into the hallway, my mind a whirlwind of chaos. I didn't know what I was going to do. All I knew was that this was far from over. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My body was exhausted, my mind frayed. But every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel Ethan's touch. Still hear his voice whispering against my skin. The heat of him, the weight of him, the way he had taken me like he owned me. It was all burned into my memory, impossible to erase. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with a mixture of shame and something far more dangerous. Need. By the time the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, I had made up my mind. This had to end. It had gone too far, become something twisted and uncontrollable. I had to put a stop to it before Daniel found out, before everything fell apart. Before I lost myself completely. I forced myself out of bed, my movements sluggish as I got dressed and headed downstairs. The house was eerily silent, the air thick with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt maybe. Or anticipation. I told myself I was imagining things, that the walls weren't really closing in around me, that the ground beneath my feet wasn't unsteady. But as I made my way to the kitchen, I froze. Ethan was there. He stood by the counter, a mug of coffee in his hand, looking as composed as ever. But his eyes, those dark, piercing eyes, told a different story. They raked over me slowly, possessively, as if he were stripping me bare all over again. As if last night had only been the beginning. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. We need to talk. His lips curved into a smirk, but there was something sharp beneath it. Good morning to you too. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Ethan, I mean it. This can't happen again. He took a slow sip of his coffee. Unbothered. Why not? Frustration bubbled in my chest. You know why? He set his mug down and took a step toward me. I took a step back, but it was useless. He kept coming, closing the distance between us until I was trapped between him and the counter. My breath hitched as he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his touch far too gentle. I don't think you really want to stop, he murmured. My body betrayed me, leaning into his touch despite everything. Ethan, tell me you don't want me, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Look me in the eyes and tell me last night was a mistake. I opened my mouth, ready to say the words, ready to push him away. But I couldn't. Because it wasn't a mistake. It was wrong. Yes, unforgivably wrong, but that didn't change the fact that I wanted him. that some sick, desperate part of me needed him in a way I couldn't explain. He saw it. Of course he did. His smirk widened, and before I could stop him, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a slow, deliberate tease. I gasped, my resolve crumbling as his hand slid down my sides, gripping my waist, pulling me flush against him. "This is madness," I whispered. His mouth traced along my jaw, sending shivers down my spine. "Then let's be mad together." I was lost before I even had the chance to fight it. The kitchen became our battleground, a whirlwind of heat and desperation. His hands roamed my body like he had every right to it, and I let him. God help me, I let him. I didn't hear the footsteps. Didn't realize we weren't alone, until a sharp voice cut through the air. What the hell is going on here? My blood ran cold. Daniel. I shoved Ethan away, my heart slamming against my ribs as I turned to face my husband. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock and something else, something darker. Betrayal. Disgust. Silence stretched between us, suffocating, unbearable. Then, without warning, Daniel lunged. He slammed into Ethan, sending him crashing against the counter. A sickening crack filled the air as dishes shattered, coffee spilling everywhere. Ethan barely had time to react before Daniel's fist connected with his jaw, the force of it snapping his head to the side. "Daniel, stop!" I screamed, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him back. He shook me off, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. "How long?" he demanded, his voice raw, broken. "How long has this been going on?" I couldn't answer. Ethan wiped the blood from his lip, his expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" Daniel let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You son of a bitch." Another punch. This time Ethan was ready. He ducked, twisting Daniel's arm behind his back in one swift motion. "Careful," he warned, his voice low, dangerous. "You're not as strong as you think you are." Daniel struggled, fury burning in his eyes. "You think you can take everything from me? My wife. My home." Ethan's grip tightened. "She was never yours." The words landed like a blow. Daniel stilled, his breath coming in harsh gasps. Slowly, he turned his gaze to me, and for the first time, I saw it, the realization dawning in his eyes. "Oh my God," he whispered. The air in the room shifted, thick with something suffocating. "You knew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't you?" I swallowed hard. "Daniel, He staggered back, shaking his head. "You knew who he was. From the beginning." Tears burned my eyes. I never meant for this to happen. His laughter was hollow, empty. But it did. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Then Daniel exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging. "Get out." My stomach twisted. "Daniel, please. Get out." I had no choice. Ethan took my hand, his grip firm, unyielding. I let him lead me away. Let him pull me out of the house, out of the life I had spent years building. As the door slammed shut behind us, a single thought echoed in my mind. There was no turning back now. The cold night air bit into my skin as Ethan led me away from the house, his grip firm, unwavering. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might break free from my ribcage. Behind me, the house loomed in the darkness, the door I had walked through so many times now shut, locked, sealing away everything I had built, everything I had destroyed. My legs felt weak, but Ethan didn't slow down. He didn't look back. We reached his car and he opened the door, motioning for me to get in. My hands trembled as I clutched the edge of my dress, my mind screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to fix this. But there was nothing left to fix. There was no undoing what had been done. So I got in. Ethan slid into the driver's seat beside me, starting the engine without a word. The silence was suffocating, the weight of our choices pressing down on us like a physical force. He drove fast, the city lights blurring past us in streaks of neon and shadow. I stared out the window, my fingers digging into my lap, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of the chaos swirling inside me. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "Somewhere far from here." It should have scared me. The way he said it, the way his jaw was clenched, his body tense with something I couldn't quite place. But fear was a luxury I no longer had. Minutes passed, then hours. I didn't know where we were anymore. The city had long since faded behind us, replaced by endless stretches of darkness, punctuated only by the glow of headlights on the empty road. My eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling at me, but I fought it. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant facing the truth. I wasn't ready for that. Ethan pulled off the highway, turning onto a narrow road lined with trees, the branches twisting overhead like skeletal fingers. Eventually, we reached a secluded house, barely visible in the dim light. He cut the engine and turned to me, his eyes unreadable. "We can stay here for now," he said. I swallowed, nodding. I didn't ask whose house it was. I didn't care. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the scent of aged wood, and something faintly metallic. The furniture was sparse, the walls bare. It felt untouched, abandoned, like a place meant for ghosts. Maybe that's what we were now. Ethan closed the door behind us, locking it with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. When he turned to me, his gaze burned with something dark, something I couldn't name. "You still regret it?" he asked. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. Did I? I should have. I should have been drowning in guilt, in shame, in the devastating weight of everything I had lost. But as I stood there, staring at him, all I felt was an unbearable ache, a hunger that refused to be silenced. "No," I whispered. The tension snapped. Ethan was on me before I could take another breath, his hands tangling in my hair, his mouth claiming mine with a desperation that sent heat flooding through my veins. I gasped against his lips, my body arching into his as he pressed me against the wall, his fingers digging into my hips, possessive, demanding. "You're mine," he growled against my skin. A shudder ran through me. Yes, it was madness, pure and unfiltered, but I didn't care. I let him consume me, let him take me apart and put me back together in ways I had never known possible. Every touch, every kiss, every ragged breath was a declaration, a promise, a surrender. There was no past, no future. Only this. Only us. Hours blurred into nothingness. When it was over, we lay tangled in the sheets, our bodies slick with sweat, our breaths uneven. I traced lazy patterns across his chest, my mind numb, my heart raw. Ethan exhaled heavily, his fingers threading through my hair. "We can leave the country," he murmured. "Start over." I stilled. Leave. A part of me wanted to say yes, to run, to escape, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But another part, the part that still clung to the remnants of my old life, hesitated. "I don't know," I admitted. His grip tightened slightly. "There's nothing left for you there, Lilith." The way he said my name sent a chill down my spine. He was right. Daniel would never forgive me. The life I had known was gone. But something about the way Ethan spoke, the intensity in his eyes, it unsettled me. "What about you?" I asked. "Is this what you wanted all along?" His lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. "I always get what I want." A pit formed in my stomach. Before I could respond, a noise outside made us both freeze. Footsteps. Ethan shot up, his body tense, his eyes dark with something primal. He grabbed his jeans from the floor, pulling them on in one swift motion before reaching for the gun tucked into his bag. "Stay here," he ordered. I barely had time to protest before he was gone, slipping out into the darkness. My pulse thundered in my ears, my hands clutching the sheets as silence stretched on. Seconds passed, then minutes, then gunfire. I jolted upright, panic clawing at my throat. More shots. A shout. A crash. I stumbled out of bed, grabbing the nearest piece of clothing, and throwing it on as I ran to the door. My hands trembled as I twisted the handle, my breath coming in short gasps. When I stepped outside, my world shattered. Daniel stood in the moonlight, a gun in his hand, his face twisted with fury and something far worse, betrayal. Blood dripped from his temple, his shirt stained crimson. Ethan lay on the ground, motionless, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. My stomach lurched. "Daniel," I choked out. His eyes snapped to mine, wild and burning. "You think you could just run away?" he spat. "With him?" I shook my head, my entire body trembling. "It's not. It's over, Lilith." He raised the gun. A single shot rang out. Darkness swallowed me whole,